Good evening. I'm Hope Preston, and welcome to the Washington County Monthly Speakers Series. Our presenter tonight is Geoff Puryear, who is a Douglas County Master Gardener. And as you can see, he's going to be speaking, as you all know, because you signed up for it, drought resilient landscaping. Geoff has been a Douglas County Master Gardener since 2012, and he is the designer and the head of the Xeriscape and Herb Gardens at the Discovery Garden in Roseburg. He's also an avid collector of plants and heirloom seeds and a former nurseryman and market gardener. So he's got a lot of experience working on plants both in the ground and in containers. And I'm sure he has a great deal to tell us about a subject that's only getting more important year after year. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A down at the bottom of the screen, and at the end of the presentation, I will feed the questions to him and he will answer them. And a couple of people have asked if they are muted. Everyone is muted and everyone doesn't have video. So you're all looking at Geoff and hearing from Geoff. So, Geoff, I now turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks so much. Welcome. I am here to talk about drought resilient landscaping using the Xeriscape principles to save water as well as survive these droughts that we keep having. So, a little bit about me. I'm a master gardener since 2012. I've been working in our Xeriscape garden since 2013. It is serving as a huge outdoor laboratory for myself in trying out lots of perennials and some annuals and how they do in our Mediterranean climate down here in Roseburg. I collect a lot of plants, but I can't pick a favorite. So my favorite order of plants is the Saxifragales, which includes plants like sedum, sempervivum, and all kinds of others. And I do design and maintain the Xeriscape garden. And here, this is a picture of me doing my summer maintenance, which we'll talk about a little bit more, but it's just sweeping the cobwebs out of the agaves. Otherwise, I don't do much summer maintenance. So, what is a naturalized garden? It's a self-sustaining landscape that's adapted to your local climate and resilient to drought. So, what we're planting eventually should find its equilibrium within your landscape. It requires minimum irrigation, fertilizers, any inputs, and maintenance, increasing your sustainability, and it conserves your resources. The design that we're talking about today is going to take inspiration from your natural ecosystems. So we're talking about mimicking what we have or making something that will work with what you want. It supports biodiversity and enhances ecological balance by having multiple species as well as not having as many inputs to affect pollinators and such. And we're working with nature rather than against it, taking advantage of microclimates, your native soil, and the natural movement of water, ultimately finding that equilibrium. All of the pictures that we see here on my slides are of the Xeriscape garden over the last 4 years. So we can see it's a very large area within our demonstration garden out at River Forks Park in Roseburg. And so this is fall down in our area where we actually take advantage of wastewater. So some of this is actually getting flooded on a regular basis. But for the rest of the garden, as we look at the pictures, it has never been watered in a common sense of using irrigation or even watering plants in, because it's all about timing. So, how do we get to a naturalized garden, something that can resist drought, something that's resilient in drought? And that's by shifting our mindset from aesthetic first plant selection. So that means not choosing the plants based on how they look, but rather how they perform within the space you have. So instead of grabbing things and then trying to figure out where they go, we're going to look at planting for the space. So mindful planning, considering every aspect of the landscape in order to choose the right plants. And we're going to look to nature for the inspiration. And this has all been documented as a system called xeriscape, which is a form of permaculture. So we're going to use that to be more resilient to drought. So the seven principles of xeriscape was originally developed by the Denver Water Board as a way to conserve municipal water use. And so it does have a reputation of being anti-lawn because most turf grass is excessively thirsty in the summertime. But it also is about making sure that you don't overwork yourself. So xeros is the Greek for dry. So a xeriscape is just a landscape that's dry. Or you can put it in a lot of different ways, but it is a form of permaculture. So we're going to think about everything in the planning phase. So you got to plan it with your design. You want to understand your soil as well as look at maybe improving it, using irrigation efficiently, as well as zoning your water, selecting the right plants, limiting turf and turf alternatives, using mulch, and in the seventh principle, it's sustainable maintenance. So, with planning and design, you don't want to start without a plan when you're going to renovate or start a new landscape. There's a lot to do with timing of the seasons. And so each step of your project should be focused around the seasons and how we have our weather patterns here in Western Oregon. So you want to start by drawing a map and you want to identify the different areas within your landscape. So you have areas for plants, like your perennial borders, areas for walking, areas for play, as well as maybe decorative turf or areas that don't get used. You also want to know in your plan where your structures are. Structures can really change the way water moves as well as the way the sun moves. And then you want to know where your water source is. That should be the center. Even though we're talking about going without, we still need some water just in case. So plantings should be centered around that water source, especially for your high need plants. And so that's your vegetables, the things that you want to get produce from, or things that require more water that you want to grow. And then perennial plantings should always be done in the rainy season. So we don't want to just go out to the nursery any time of the year, pick out plants that we are intentionally wanting to be drought tolerant, and planting those out. We need to wait for the fall through the winter. And this winter, it's been kind of hard. It basically didn't happen in my area. So we're already out of the window for planting perennials in a drought resilient way this year. So it will require some water when we plant, if we do plan to put things in the ground. So with structures, you have your fences, sheds, walls, all of those create microclimates. And so fences and walls will block wind, they'll retain heat or even keep heat away. So providing shade and actually little cold spots that may be less resilient in the winter. Trellises and pergolas will help you lift things up as well as make more vertical growing space so you can grow more, as well as create even more microclimates. And then remember, south-facing walls will radiate heat, benefiting some plants, but most of the time it's just going to cook them. So you really want to be conscious about where you put these plants. A plant like a hydrangea, which is very water loving, will just cook right up if it's not watered almost twice a day in a south-facing wall in the middle of summer. So when you obviously plants need water or soil to grow. Most plants will grow in anywhere from a regular garden soil to a harsh one. It just depends on what you choose. So, in order to know what your soil is, you should definitely have a soil test. You can do a simple texture test at home to figure out how much clay, sand, organic material, and silt you have. And that will determine what kind of soil you have. It'll be more important to look at your soil than any other aspect of your garden. plays host to not just roots, but a whole community of organisms. There's your fungi, your earthworms, other beneficial organisms that make it all happen. So, going to your local extension office most likely will get you to a soil test to tell you what your nutrient levels are because a lot of the times people will put too much fertilizer or they'll lime or they'll sulfur without need, and then they end up having the wrong soil and they've spent a lot of money that they didn't need to. So definitely have a soil test. So there are obviously a million different types of soil. A lot of people have seen this soil triangle before, where you have your clay, silt, and sand, and the percentages of them determine what type of soil you have. So with clay soils, they're dense and they compact really easily. So you can improve their permeability by adding organic material. Usually we're going to do that by adding to the top and not necessarily mixing in. Sandy soils are generally going to need to have their water retention increased. And again, that's by adding organic material. And then with your pH, most people in their regular landscapes will have a neutral pH, something that's workable for most plants. And most of the landscape plants that are available for purchase are good with a varying area in the neutrality zone. Of course, if you have a hyperacidic soil, you look at plants in the ericaceous uh, sort of realm, like things that like acidic soil. We're not necessarily always wanting to change the pH of our soil. We should work with what we have. And then you can also improve water retention by ditching the soil. So actually divoting the soil where things are going to grow, and that's going to collect the water. Or in areas like your clay soils where you have water staying in one place, if you hill it up, the soil will have improved drainage. And so it'll be more hospitable to plants that like a well-draining soil. So we're looking at not changing everything fundamentally. We're just making little changes to make things more hospitable. And then, of course, you can improve soil with plants. There's some great stuff about planting nitrogen fixers. So those are your legumes and some ceanothus. That'll actually increase the fertility of the soil. And then you have dynamic accumulators that actually will collect other nutrients and bring them to the surface for other plants to use. So the living soil is the reason why we want to do this. We want to make the most active living soil we can. Worms, isopods, or pill bugs, those little bugs, and all other creatures that live in the soil break down material. They aerate the soil, and through those processes, add fertility. Mycorrhizal fungi, which are present in most soils, especially in regular gardens, they allow plants to get even more nutrients and water. So they'll have a symbiotic relationship, something that's beneficial for both the plant and the fungus, and they'll exchange water and nutrients to the benefit of them both. So with this picture here, this is not in my garden. This is a Douglas fir seedling showing that the root zone is huge. You can see in the picture all the tan. But what we're really looking at is mostly a network of fungus. And that network is reaching out further than the tree itself can. And it's getting those nutrients to the plant. And in exchange, they get a little bit of sugar from the photosynthesis that the tree is making. It's present in most soils. You can intentionally inoculate. There's lots of powders available of endomycorrhizae, but you have to put that on the roots for it to be successful. So with mycorrhiza, you're going to have that already in your garden, most likely. But you can add it. It comes with a lot of modern fertilizers. It also is usually present in potting soils. You'll see it when you open a potting soil. It'll have kind of a white glow, or almost sometimes it's like a day glow blue, which is really cool. But you do need that. And in order to make that work, we need to have a regular soil moisture level as well as cool soil that doesn't get too hot. So with nitrogen fixers, those are plants that also have a symbiotic relationship, but instead of with the fungus, it's with bacteria. And so that bacteria will attach itself to the roots of the plant and take atmospheric nitrogen out of the air and make it available as ammoniated nitrogen, which is a direct fertilizer for plants. It is released once the legume or other nitrogen fixer is has dieback or you cut it back, and that nitrogen gets released to the surrounding plants. So over time, this is going to build fertility, usually in the short term, but we're going to see these regularly come up. Plants like clovers will come up on their own. So the more you grow, the more fertile it'll be. There's also the dynamic accumulators. They are plants that usually have deep tap roots, so they go down deeper than most other plants around them. They bring up nutrients into their leaves, and as those leaves break down, that adds more fertility to the soil. So some of those common ones, everybody's going to know comfrey. That is a lovely perennial in the right spot. It once you have it forever. It should be planted with care, and never use a seeded variety. It should always be the sterile variety. Dandelions, another one that some people just don't like, but they are one of the great dynamic accumulators. And then lamb's quarters, which isn't necessarily a great plant, and I believe it is on the noxious list here in Oregon. And then nettle is also great, and that can make a good fertilizer as well. So the other aspect, of course, we've got water. You can have a good drought resilient garden and still water, but you don't necessarily have to. That's some proof down in here in Roseburg. But using drip irrigation and soaker hoses is the most efficient way to use water. It's going to target the root zone and it won't evaporate as quickly as, say, an aerial sprayer. So your common sprinklers that put water up in the air to just have it blow away or evaporate in the hot summer. You always want to water thoroughly and infrequently, and that'll encourage more resilient roots. And so the more the water gets to the root zone, the deeper it'll soak, and those roots will go down with it, making them deeper and deeper, more resilient to the drought. And then you always want to water early morning. And then in summer, you can use late evening water, but being cautious to not get leaves wet, as that can move disease around. You also, when you're coming into a landscape or you're designing something new, you always want to identify underground pipes and water access points before you landscape. Call 811 free service. They'll come out and tell you where your pipes are. You can install rainwater collections. So like either these 50-gallon rain barrels or something big, something small. Just having a little bit of water will help you save over time on your water bill. And then, of course, a lot of people might inherit or have an automatic irrigation system. And the principles of Xeriscape ask us to make sure we adjust those with the seasons and we're not using municipal water when it's raining. But the most important thing about gardening with water is you want to group your plants by your water needs. So that's called hydrozoning. You want to take advantage of the natural moisture patterns in the landscape or create your own by ditching or taking advantage of those low-lying areas that are already there. Or in drier raised areas, you can plant things that like that. So succulents and other more drought hardy plants. Here, this is a penstemon and a lily. They're growing really well in no water, and they are both about the same, where they like to dry out evenly, a little bit of shade, and they do really well together. So there's some different strategies when it comes to zoning. So you have your oasis zones. That's where you're really going to have a lot of water use. That's going to be closest to your source of water, so the spigot. Areas that are mainly the convenience is there to irrigate. And that's where you want to focus your water use is on vegetables, fruit, and other things that are desirable and require water. You have your transition zone where you can get water there, but you don't necessarily want to water there. And so that's shrubs and perennials that can make deep roots. They will take to irrigation, but they'll survive without it if you forget. And then you have your naturalized zones, the low to no irrigation. And native plants are wonderful in that area if you get the right species, as well as lots of Mediterranean plants, things that just thrive without that summer irrigation. So choosing the right plant for the right place. You want to select plants based on what kind of soil you have, what kind of sun you get, how much space do you have, and then your climate zone. So here in Roseburg, we're zone 9A to 9B, sometimes 8B. It depends on the winter. This year we didn't experience much frost, so that will affect the kind of plants that you can grow. As we go more north, the zone will change a little bit. So the nighttime temperatures will be colder in the winter than we experience here. So some of the plants you see might not be the best, but I have chosen most of our plants out of the xeriscape to survive down to about zone 5. So with a little bit of a caveat there, most of these plants are hardy. You also want to think about how long a plant will live. Is it an annual? Is it a biennial? Is it a perennial? Is it a tender perennial? Most plants are perennials. Annual plants are fairly rare in the plant world. And so most of the things we call annuals are actually just tender perennials. So that just means they won't survive the winter. And then, of course, that comes up to hardiness and water requirements. You also want to know how's it going to grow. So you have your ephemerals that just pop up in spring or fall and then they disappear. You have your herbaceous plants that'll grow all through the summer and then die back in the winter. You have evergreen plants, you have mats like ground covers, vines, shrubs, and trees. And then the biggest consideration for sustainability is how big is that plant actually going to get? Does it require trimming back on a regular basis? And how much maintenance is it going to need? So with the xeriscape idea, there is no such thing as a xeriscape plant. There are plants that work in the place that you have. So what I have right now is I have a plant list available on our Douglas County Master Gardener website with about 300 plants that have worked for us in the Discovery Garden that survive without any water. But there are ways to tell how a plant's going to do in the nursery. So we want to look for their adaptations. So with full sun, there's specific adaptations to look for with silver or blue foliage, like this Dusty Miller in the picture, where that is actually usually a sunscreen or some sort of way to reflect the sun. We have hairy leaves, like the Dusty Miller, and those hairs usually capture atmospheric moisture like fog and dew and needle-like or small leaves. So leaves that are small, and those are going to be less likely to wilt, and they have less surface area to be exposed to the sun. So we're thinking about, say, rosemary has needle-like leaves, or salvias. A lot of salvias will have small leaves. And then, of course, you have your pine trees and things like that. They have that same sort of needle foliage that helps them sort of not get hit by sun rays. And then with drought resistance, which that is, all of those were also drought resistant, but some things that are specifically designed for drought resistance are basal rosettes, like your dandelions, or one of the popular ones would be mullein. Mullein is a great example of a basal rosette where the leaves all kind of flatten out against the dirt around it, and that's going to create its own mulch, as well as a funnel to direct water to the roots. You also can look for succulent or waxy leaves. Most of the succulents are obviously they're very popular as drought resilient plants. That's the picture up in the top left. That's Sedum palmeri, which is from Mexico. And that guy has a lot of the characteristics. So you've got bluish teal leaves, a rosette that will get the water to where it needs to go. And then the succulent itself will hold on to water and they process just at night, so they are very drought resistant. And then we want to look for plants that might naturalize just because they're from our area. So native plants and plants from similar climates. So here in Roseburg, we're in sort of like the south of France. So very mild winters most of the time, but very hot summers. So our native plants are very well accustomed to that if we match our ecosystem. So here in my house, I live in a meadow, and so I wouldn't choose forest plants as my native plants. I would choose plants from other similar meadows around me. So we would be looking at oak trees, various rushes, things that you would find if you were to go out to a similar ecosystem. So avoiding the wrong plant in the wrong place. So you want to research the needs of the plants before you buy them. And there's lots of ways to research. Of course, we want to look for good uh, research-based information. So there's a few different places that I like to go to. So I go to the Oregon State Landscape I'm sorry, I'm lost for words on that one. The database of landscape plants at OSU, as well as the Missouri Botanical Gardens and OregonFlora.org gives a lot of great information about native plants. Don't be afraid to move struggling plants to somewhere that they might be better suited. However, if you remove them and they're wilted and it's the middle of the summer, it may be difficult for them to bounce back without removing the majority of the growth. So we'll have to cut back all the way for the most part with herbaceous perennials and shrubs if we're going to try to move those in the summertime. You can always improve soil drainage by lifting the soil up or adding organic material. And then you can create shade for sensitive plants or put sensitive plants in the shade or modify your design instead of forcing high water plants into naturally dry areas. So what we're looking at here on the side is kind of the entrance of the xeriscape garden, and it's hot and dry, but only in the summertime. And that's a hard place to work. So along the south edge of the garden is a row of 40-foot Douglas firs, making a hedge, as well as a lot of other shade trees all around. So this area makes it kind of difficult to grow in because we don't have the same sun exposure from winter to summer. And so that's something we really want to look at. The soil is also very sandy, so it doesn't hold a lot of water. And so as what we're looking at here is probably from about 2 years ago. And over the course of the last 12 years of working out at the garden, all of these plants have moved to find the best place. So nothing's been where it was originally planted. Everything gets moved around if it just doesn't like it. So don't be afraid to do that. But we do want to be conscious about what time of year you're moving your plants. So when it comes to perennials, shrubs, and trees, establishing them is the biggest challenge. So you want to plant hardy perennials in the rainy season so that they can have a faster and healthier establishment period. Even though plants may be dormant, where they don't have any leaves or they've died back, their roots are still actively growing for most of the winter. So they will be able to begin the establishment process in fall or winter when you plant them. Newly planted trees and shrubs, and some perennials, depending on how fast they grow, will require longer periods of establishment before they're fully ready to go without water. So lots of nursing. So to do that successfully without using too much water, you want to soak the root zone on a slow drip to encourage the roots to go deep, and you want to start small. It may be tempting to go with a 2 gallon or a 5 gallon plant because it's nice and big out at the nursery, but there are lots of drawbacks to that. So the plant has gone for 2 or 3 or 4 years, growing in a comfortable nursery setting where they get regular water, regular feed. Maybe they're actually too happy and they're root bound. You can also pick up diseased plants without knowing it. The longer a pot sticks around, the longer the plant is in the nursery, the more chance it'll have to get a disease that may not show itself until the next season. A smaller plant will not have all those things. It'll grow very quickly. It will not have been too root bound and not too babied. So overall, it's cheaper and a much better idea to start small and let it grow big and establish itself naturally. And a lot of the growth you see in the nursery may end up just dying back in the establishment process. There's also direct sowing. Direct sowing is one of the fastest, easiest way to create a drought resilient garden. So we're talking about sowing seeds right where they're going to grow. So some of the more common ways would be with wildflower mixes, and those have a much shorter establishment period. So a lot of wildflower mixes and other perennials like to be sown in late summer, early fall. And so that means that we throw the seeds out, water them once or twice before it starts raining, and they will sprout and grow through the rainy season. And so their establishment period actually starts in nice, wet environment for them to establish. They'll get their roots down deep, and then by that summer, they'll most likely not require any water at all to continue their growth cycle if they're the appropriate plants. We don't want to choose tropical plants or plants that are definitely not from an area like ours. Of course, they'll weed themselves out over time, and the stalwarts will stick around. Choosing native plants is an easy answer. They establish pretty easily, especially if they're in the correct location, and they can serve as a backbone in the naturalized garden. But you always want to research. There are, if you're from my area, we have one of the largest biodiversities in North America. So we can plant a lot of plants and call them native because we are within this specific area. But like I was saying earlier, I don't live in a forest, so I shouldn't choose forest plants unless I can mimic that myself by starting a forest with Douglas firs and all that, and then slowly introducing those plants. But there's also the bullies. Native plants, especially in good garden soil, will take over very quickly. There are some things like Pearly Everlastings is a really great drought resilient plant, but in the wrong place, it can take over and run your whole garden and you'll only have little white flowers. So you always want to look at what's doing well around you, what sort of plants you would see, and what would match with what's available. And there's lots available. One of the fun ones we have here is this picture here is Calmeopsis fragrans. It's one of our Douglas County endemics, so it only exists here in Douglas County. But it's not going to grow well in every garden. It needs well-drained and moderately acidic soil in a dappled shade. And so if you don't have that, you either have to create it or choose something different. But I would probably create a special place for this Calmeopsis if I could find one. But this can be seen out at our rock garden at the Discovery Garden. So some generalized success has been had in multiple landscapes that I've designed. And so here we see a picture of coral bells, although they're not coral. This is Euchera micrantha. It's our native Euchera here. And it's actually the parent of most of the fancy coral bells you'll see with different colored foliage. And so for the shade, behind that is a flowering currant. Sword ferns do great. Oregon grape is great in any environment. Eucharoids like the Heuchera or Tiarella, and Sedum spathifolium, which is popular across the world as probably one of the most popular sedums grown, but for us, it grows everywhere. And then in the sun, Oregon grape again, there's lots of species available and a few cultivars. Ceanothus or California lilac is great in a full sun environment as long as there's not a lot of water. They don't survive with a lot of water. Riverbank lupin, California poppy, and showy milkweed. All of those will do well in most average garden soils. Although, again, showy milkweed could be a bully. It does spread underground. If you water it, it'll go crazy. If you don't water it, it doesn't go crazy as much. But it's a great thing for monarch butterflies if you're within the path for them. Another thing with plant selection is to be aware of dormancy. We all know winter dormancy, which is very common. That's where the trees will lose their leaves. Everything gets ready for winter by dying back. But there is summer dormancy. Summer dormancy is actually pretty prevalent as well. And a lot of drought adapted plants can turn yellow, they'll shed leaves, they'll do all kinds of things to go dormant. Some of them you can't tell. But a lot of plants have adapted to survive drought through metabolism changes. So in this picture here, we have Hylotelephium autumn joy, or some people call it sedum autumn joy. It's not technically a sedum. It actually has the ability to switch the way it breathes. And so that's how succulents like this Hylotelephium survive drought. So they'll actually stop breathing during the day, and then that allows them to hold in as much moisture as possible. And then they at night will start breathing and processing the sugars. And so that's how they survive that drought. And a lot of plants actually have what's called sorry, the facultative cam is the one where they can change where they are. And so there's some that can't change, like cacti, especially prickly pear cactus and aloes. They don't actually change the way they breathe. So they don't breathe during the day. So watering them during the day will actually do them harm. If they're in their dormancy or in their regular metabolism. So we don't want to water summer dormant plants unless we know water is coming, or we can water at night when they're breathing. Native plants are generally adapted to dry summers because most of Western Oregon is going to be a dry summer. And some of them don't survive our gardens if we water. They need to go through that summer dormancy. So it's really important to understand what your plant needs. So that's where we really want to research. And then during the time of dormancy or even just summer in general, I would avoid pruning or overwatering. Pruning is going to usually incite growth or stress the plant out. If it wants to actively grow, it will probably try to grow back. If there's no available water for it in the soil, it'll just become stressed and it might even give up the ghost. So sorry, I'll just go back. So with plant selection, I have a long list of plants. There's lots of things to do. A lot of it is trial and error. So again, don't be afraid to move things around. Give things a go. If they don't work, move them somewhere else and try something new. So another thing we're talking about is limiting turf and turf alternatives. So we're talking turf grass, so lawns. We want to reduce the areas of lawn to conserve water. That's number one. Lawn is serves a purpose of being either decorative or somewhere to play, somewhere for the dogs. But there are ways to do it without using too much water. So you can opt for eco lawns, which are a mix of species, not just grass. Or you could switch to drought tolerant ground covers. You can also use hardscaping, various other methods. You could change it to a perennial bed. Um, there's just, if you want to conserve water, talk about surviving the drought, lawn is not the way to go. But you can choose lawn mixes specifically made for your area and the conditions of the space. So does it get shade? Does it get sun? What's the water retention like in your soil? And then, of course, if you live in an area that doesn't have wildfire as an issue, you can allow your grass to go dormant in the summer. If it's a perennial grass, it should be able to survive with about an inch of water once a month during the dry season. And it'll be brown, but it'll immediately come back to green in the rainy season. So here's a picture of an eco lawn. This is the Douglas County Courthouse. And so we can see all the white flowers of the clover. It also has a perennial ryegrass as the main grass, and then yarrow, one of our native wildflowers, is also mixed in there. And so the benefit of this is that even if we don't water, a lot of these are going to stay green. The grass may not stay green, but the clovers and the yarrow will stay green, as well as the yarrow and clover will add nutrients to the ground, especially the clover with its nitrogen fixation. So this is a really great example of a lawn you couldn't tell unless it was blooming was a mix of plants. So there are also lots of alternatives. So eco lawns, that's your clover with grass, and then ground covers like thyme, yarrow, or other native low-growing plants. Like here on the side, this is a sun rose, which is in the sort of the rock rose family. You can also replace it with hardscaping. So you could put down gravel, pathways, garden beds. There's all kinds of options, but trying to eliminate the turf will make it seem like you have a more healthy yard rather than a big brown yard, because who knows what kind of water we'll have this summer. So the key to success in any drought resilient garden is going to be using mulch. Mulch, mulch, mulch. It's the most important thing. My favorite quote about gardening is bare soil is dead soil. That's Amelia Hazelip. She's one of the founders of modern vegetable permaculture. But it is essential for retaining moisture and improving the health of your soil if you use organic mulches. It reduces the evaporation and it prevents soil compaction and it moderates your soil temperatures. And that's another important aspect of keeping the mycorrhiza active in your upper layer of soil. It's also going to help suppress weeds if you're actively adding more mulch to your garden year or every 6 months or every couple days, depending on how you garden. And then it'll be really important to not have any exposed area of soil, especially around gardens, because that's just going to allow water to be wicked out in that location. Water will move. So every exposed area should be covered. Here on the side, these are all the mulches that were available when I took this picture here in Douglas County. It goes from big chunks of fir all the way to giant boulders from the river. And so on that spectrum, the giant chunks of fir are going to last a lot longer than the fines, like this hemlock dark mulch down the middle. Gravel is successful. It holds a lot of moisture underneath it. However, that also is a great breeding ground for weeds. So the more gravel you have, the more weeds you're going to have. Seeds love to sprout in gravel. I use gravel when I start seeds. It's little gravel, chicken grit, but it is something that you want to think about for sustainability. So larger rocks like these river rocks or boulders are great options because they hold a lot of moisture underneath them, and there's not a lot of opportunities for weeds to come up. So good planning makes weeds less of a bother. So with organic mulches, those are going to decompose over time, and they'll, through that, improve soil health. It should never really exceed 4 inches in depth for fresh mulch. After 4 inches, we start to really have an effect on gaseous exchange. It also can make the soil not warm up enough. So, if we're talking about vegetable gardens, we want to have a thinner mulch, especially in the early spring, and that can be increased into summertime as long as water is able to get down to the roots. Wood chips are a great option. They're free. It depends on where you are, of course. We don't want to move noxious insects or anything like that. So you want to know where your mulch is coming from. Even the pine needles that fall from your trees make a great mulch. They do not change the acidity. No mulch can change the acidity of your soil in a noticeable way. Straw is great, but it may take up more nitrogen out of the soil than, say, wood chips or bark. And then you want to use something that's always going to be chunkier or of a different texture from your soil. So regular sifted compost is not mulch. That is not going to do a good job of holding in the moisture. Bark is being studied right now for its abilities to wick water away. So it's not necessarily the best choice. It is a more aesthetically pleasing choice, but it shouldn't be used where you're going to regularly irrigate because it'll just usually just wick the water away more than letting it go through. And then with organic mulches, every 1 to 2 years, you'll have to replenish because depending on how active your soil is, if you have clay soil, all of that stuff's going to affect the length of time your mulch lasts. But the denser the mulch, the thicker the mulch, like those chunks of fir, some of those, like in my garden, I've had the chunks of fir for about 12 years. You can still find that mulch hanging around. So it does last longer the bigger the mulch is. You, of course, have your inorganic mulches, so the things that are inert. So gravel, decorative rocks. A lot of farmers will use landscape fabric or plastic. I would avoid plastic because that does inhibit gaseous exchange, and you can just create a lot of disease under the plastic. And so it's not that great, and it will eventually be a problem. So avoid plastic. Larger rocks, like I was saying, help retain moisture and they'll create little microclimates. So you can actually plant some more tender things inside rock crevices than might when in an exposed area in your garden. They're going to last a lot longer than organic mulches. But again, more maintenance, the smaller it is. And then the other downside is that they heat up. So in a full sun area, rocks may end up creating basically an oven for your plants, and your plants will just get cooked right up in the afternoon sun. So kind of avoid the hot areas for more flowering, delicate plants around gravel. So, for best practices, you want to apply at least 1 inch of mulch to maintain the moisture in the soil. It's best when it's coarse and chunky, not light and fluffy. Avoid piling mulch directly against plant stems or tree trunks to prevent rot and girdling. And dry compacted mulch, which has been there maybe for a couple months or a year, should be loosened with a rake or with your fingers because eventually it compacts together and creates paper if it's wood chips or bark. So you want to get that worked up to allow water to go through. That is one downside of mulch is that it does prevent water flow down as well. So you never want to apply mulch to dry soil. You always want to make sure the soil is moist prior to mulching. You can also use living mulch, which is similar to a lawn replacement. So that's low growing plants. Generally, they don't compete with other plants for moisture or resources. They'll actually provide a little bit of shade to the soil. Some things can be bullies that are ground covers, so we want to avoid that. Things like vinca, St. John's wort, ivy, which we shouldn't be growing mostly here in the PNW. And so those we just want to be conscious of where it sets roots down. If it's setting down a lot of roots, it may not be the best living mulch. But things like sedum don't have much roots at all, but they grow really fast and they'll spread over the ground. So that's a great living mulch. They'll also, if you do choose one that roots more, it'll help stabilize the soil. So on a slope, we don't want to worry too much about competition, but we want to keep the soil in place. And then, of course, all of this comes up to sustainable maintenance. So you can plant and plant and plant to your heart's content, but can you maintain it? A clean garden isn't necessarily what I'm talking about, but a garden that's not overgrown, a garden that looks well kept even without a lot of care. And that's really where we want to focus on making sure that we're doing sustainable practices. So here I've got a picture of my wheelbarrow in February, which is when I choose to do my maintenance. So I wait, I don't touch the garden, I let it go. It's a natural garden. I don't deadhead, I don't prune until the rain starts because then I know the plants are going to start going dormant, which is a great time for winter dormancy is when we want to clean up and prune and get those things all taken away. I also prefer to leave plants where they are. So like if I'm pruning up, I will usually leave the clippings around the area to create a mulch. And we call that chop and lay. And so basically, as long as it's aesthetically pleasing, I'll chop up the plants, lay them down, make sure they make a nice mat, and then that will actually keep me from having to buy bark mulch in my garden, and it's going to keep it more active. Of course, we don't want to do that with disease material. Disease material should always be discarded, either in the fire or in the trash. But if we've got healthy, just last year's growth or too much growth coming out of something, we're going to prune it. All of it should just be turned into mulch. Of course, you can compost it, but that's gonna skip the step. We just put it right where it's gonna go. And then, of course, when it comes to mowing, I don't think I talked about that. So if you do want to choose to keep a lawn, you should mow it as tall as possible. So allowing the plant to have more of a blade in the air. And that's going to equal being able to survive longer periods without water. And then for summertime, reducing our excessive pruning is going to save us on water and care. So it's all about choosing the plants that really look nice without that regular maintenance. And then, of course, we always want to manage invasive weeds early to prevent their spread because once something really gets going, it's going to be really difficult to get it out compared to getting it when it just sprouted. So again, we've got the chop and lay method using old plant material. We don't want to choose plants that aren't appropriate for the size of the area. So we don't want to choose plants and say, oh, well, I will hedge that because that's not necessarily sustainable, as well as when do you get out there? That's the whole thing is like if you forget, then it's too much work and then you get sort of overwhelmed and then the whole yard turns to weeds. And then avoiding synthetic fertilizers. This is the one thing that is the most important aspect of going into this growing season. If you're in Western Oregon, we're probably going to be experiencing what they call a super El Nino, which means it's going to be hotter and drier than normal. So we really want to look at how much we're fertilizing, especially with synthetics. So we're talking about Miracle-Gro, Stay Green, Schultz, all those different chemical fertilizers that are based in salt rather than organic, that basically instead of going directly to the plant like a synthetic, the organic actually requires processing from the microorganisms in the soil. And so it's a little bit more of a natural process, and the plants grow a little bit hardier. But the more synthetic fertilizer you use, they can make the plants overly lush and very weak to sudden temperature changes and if you forget to water. And so the more you fertilize, the more you have to water. So we really want to look at not over fertilizing and letting plants grow naturally. And that's where we want to take advantage of our nitrogen fixers and our dynamic accumulators because those will slowly improve the soil as well as provide nutrients in a natural way to the plants around them. So it, really just avoiding too much fertilizer is a good idea. And we really don't want to fertilize in those hot, dry times of August and September because that's just going to confuse the plant. It's going to grow weird and it may just not survive without that regular doting. So, in conclusion, here, we've got the main keys to go with are that it's working with what you have, making sure that it's low maintenance and water efficient. We can embrace the naturalized garden by accepting plants the way they grow, not overly pruning them, not doting, and then looking at how we can apply these principles to our existing landscapes. You can apply these to pretty much any landscape. These principles either in the maximum extreme where you stop watering altogether, which we did that in the beginning. It ended up being okay. Um, but there's lots of ways to go about this, but thoughtful planning is going to be the best way to do it. And there's really a lot of materials available. The full story of our xeriscape garden is available on our website at douglascountymg.org to go through and see what we went through to get this started. So it really is possible to make a drought resilient garden that looks good year round. And there's many more resources about xeriscaping. I am not the first xeriscaper. I'm not the last one, hopefully. So lots of things to look at, but starting at extension.oregonstate.edu is a great place. And I'll open it up for questions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Geoff. This has been, geez, I'm sitting here in the dark. Look at this. Let me get a light on. This there was an active chat going on the whole time you were presenting of people going back and forth with I think a couple of those were questions, and a lot of it was people just helping each other,
Oh,
which
well,
was
great.
which worked out very well. But a couple of people asked if they could have a copy of the whole PowerPoint of the slides.
Sure. Well, yeah, I can figure something out there. But I would encourage everybody to go to the website because the basically everything I just said is on our website.
Okay, on the
Um,
Douglas County Master Gardener website.
yes, under our Discovery Garden in Xeriscape.
Okay,
The whole story's there along with the plant list. Um,
okay,
yeah, every aspect of what I talked about is written out there. And then my
okay,
contact information is there as well. So I'm open to later questions.
okay. I think that that's great then. And the entire, if somebody wants to watch this again or tell somebody else about it, you should have seen in chat that it should be up on our YouTube channel, which you can access through the Washington County Master Gardener website by tomorrow night at the latest by Friday. So keep an eye out for it there if you need it. And before we get into the questions, I'm just going to um, take issue with one thing you said, which was about leaving no bare soil.
Oh, yes.
And bee people want there to be some bare soil for the ground dwelling bumblebees.
Oh, I see. I see for me I have gravel pathways. And so there are areas in our garden as well as my home garden, but around the plants themselves, anywhere near the root zones, should not
Yes,
be bare. Um,
yes,
yeah.
yep. I agree with all of that. Okay, so now we will get into the Q&A. Um, so here's somebody thinking about using containers to plant penstemon, coneflowers, black-eyed Susans. What type of soil do you recommend?
Well, a general potting soil is good for most plants. It's fairly difficult to get plants to attain an equilibrium in a pot. So you want to use something that drains well for all of those plants. So it should have some sort of pumice or perlite, pumice being the preferred material for drainage. So those plants will survive in a container better than some more water needing plants. But it's definitely really difficult to go without watering when we involve containers.
Yeah,
For some reason, the soil just dries out too fast.
yeah. Okay. What is the fire danger using wood or bark mulches?
Oh, there's definitely a fire danger. The mulch itself can cover up a fire that's underground.
Mm,
If you use a weed torch, those definitely can spread without being seen, the fire itself. So when we're talking about fire-wise landscaping, we should be avoiding bark mulch near structures. But otherwise, if we're not using a torch, and we're not in wildfire danger, mulch is mostly okay. The other consideration would be if you're on a street and someone might flick a cigarette. Um,
mm,
so obviously those are things that are out of our control,
yeah.
but we should not be piling up wood chips or bark to our house. We should be using something like gravel mulch or some other way of covering up the soil. But yeah, it's not a good idea to have mulch near the house in wildfire danger.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any comments about using sequoia needles for mulch?
Oh yeah, there's no issue using needles of any kind.
Okay.
So the way that they'll break down over time, they'll have a fungus present and they create a really beautiful soil, and we'll call that duff soil, where it's a mix of probably needles and a little bit of other organic material. It's really great for your forest woodland plants. So in our xeriscape garden, we had a larch tree up until recently, and larches will lose their needles every
Well,
year.
yeah.
And so we built a soil on that, and the coral bells do really well in that area. So any kind of needles are good. They will generally not affect. The one plant we're going to look for that could genuinely affect plants as mulch would be tree of heaven.
Mm,
That actually has a compound in it that will kill plants. So we want to avoid anything with tree of heaven. But otherwise, there's been some research, especially out of Washington State, that shows that most of these things we use as mulch will not affect the plants or the soil.
excellent. Now, Karen asks, are you aware of a bully native plant list for Oregon?
Well, that's going to be dependent on the location. So some things I wish were bullies in my yard, but could be a bully in someone else's yard. So it's how fertile your soil is. Does it match it perfectly? Does it get excess water from what it would get in a normal environment? But some of the common bullies, yeah, it's really hard to tell. But for me, I found pearly everlastings, Douglas asters, things that run underground. We kind of want to think about those runners because they will sometimes pop up feet,
Yes,
yards away
I'm
from
experiencing
their
that
mother
right
plant.
now with Douglas Aster.
Yes. So it is a trial and error. So you want to look at what the research shows.
Okay. And this idea of summer dormancy is very interesting. Is there a list of our native plants that go into summer dormancy?
No, but it's mostly going to be our succulents. So most of the seed, we have about 8 sedum species here in Western Oregon. All of those are going to be summer dormancy plants. But you can tell when a plant is in summer dormancy, usually by a golden tone to the leaves. And that's kind of signifying that it's not actively processing a lot of chlorophyll. And so that's how we know it's gone dormant. But all plants are going to take a dormancy in a different way, and they mostly have the ability to go dormant. That is just an innate plant thing. And then, of course, the plants that can't survive the summer and they just wilt and die, those ones can't go dormant. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like, sort of like as simple as every plant makes sugars. Every plant has the ability to go dormant if they're in the right spot.
All right. Um, and this is somebody asking about for an urban garden, what are your favorite natives?
Well, some of my favorites, if you have some shade, the picture here in the middle is the red flowering currant. It does great in a lot of environments. It's mainly found in woodlands, especially Douglas fir and conifer woodlands. But it is a really great plant for an urban area. Around Eugene, Oregon, it's everywhere. Every public space has these red flowering currants. They
Yeah.
also have pink flowering currants and white flowering currants. Any sort of we've got the sedum spathifolium. Again, that's one of the most popular sedums to grow in the whole world. That will do well if you have some rocks. It's actually a lithophyte, so it grows on rocks, which is great in urban environments because you got a lot of sidewalks and areas for little crevices, as well as Oregon grape. It's a wonderful stalwart. You can get it in short varieties. You can get the tall variety. You can get the spreading kind. They are just great. They don't need anything, and they are evergreen, so they're there the whole year. Um, a little bit on the spot there. I can't think of any, but we have in my plant list on our website, there's a whole native section there that are things that have done well. I've removed the bullies out of my area, um, so they're great choices.
Okay. And here's I I hope I understand this question correctly. Well, I will just read it to you. If we already have lawn, what are the best practices for removing the grass that's already established?
Oh, there's lots of options there. One of the easiest low input one would be to cut it all the way down as short as you can and cover it with cardboard. And then that cardboard should be covered with something so it doesn't fly away. And then over the course of about 6 months, maybe up to a year, the grass will be gone, especially if the mulch was thick enough. But there's like for me, I've done a lot of manual scraping with a bit large hoe, or there's digging it with a flat shovel. But a lot of the times it depends on the grass because there's a lot of grasses that have runners that are
Yeah.
really hard to remove. So it's all about the planning. So we want to know when we're going to do it and get that stuff covered as the first step, or at least removed, so that we can see it growing back and get rid of what grows back. So
Gotcha.
it should be the first step.
Okay. Any suggestion? Here's a very specific for sloped beds in a windy location.
Oh, so we're looking at that's like a coastal habitat, even though you may not be on the coast. So one of the things I would recommend is to add rocks. So we're looking at like here on the far right screen, we've got some large serpentine boulders. Those will actually capture the soil moisture, and so the plants around them will do really well and help to start establish little microclimates on the slope. Wind does make it difficult, so we want to look for short plants or conifers that can adapt to a high wind. So we're talking about junipers mainly for low growing, wind capable slope plants. But the solution is never one plant. It's going to be a mix of plants. If we're finding one plant takes over too much, we call those bullies and they become
Mm.
invasive. So we don't want to look for a quick fix. But adding something to capture the water moving down like boulders, or there's some new plastic sort of tier builders. So they're like long plastic, usually circular or half circles that people will actually put to retain the soil and start capturing that water as it drains down.
Sort of like a terrace.
Yes, making
Terracing.
terraces. Yeah, that's the ancient solution. The Mayans got
Yeah.
that right. Yeah.
Okay, those are the questions, and I think the number of questions and the active chat that was going on showed that this was a very well received presentation. So, Geoff, thank you a lot, and I think there will be a lot of visits to the website.
Oh, great, great. Yes, and yeah, my contact information is on the bottom of every one of the pages I did the website. So feel free to send me more questions. And come visit our garden. It's open Monday through Friday, or no, I'm sorry, every day of the week, dawn to dusk. It's free entry. There's lots to explore. It's 22 different gardens, an acre and a half of just perennials and annuals, and a wonderful place to spend the afternoon.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
we're now going to change gears and move to our chapter meeting. So
Thank you.
let's